Why do we care so deeply about what others think of us? Why can one glance of disapproval feel like rejection from the entire world? And why, even as adults, do we still chase the approval of people who once made us feel invisible? The truth is, our craving for validation isn't just a personality flaw or a modern-day consequence of social media. It's rooted in the very architecture of our psyche. From the earliest moments of life, we are conditioned to believe that love, safety, and acceptance must be earned. Approval becomes the currency of worth. And slowly, often without realizing it, we learn to betray ourselves in small, quiet ways, just to be liked, chosen, or praised. Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychological thinkers of the 20th century, believed that much of our suffering stems from the split between who we truly are and the version of ourselves we present to the world. This split is not accidental. It is a survival strategy. But what begins as a way to feel safe eventually becomes the very reason we feel lost.
In this video, we'll explore the deep psychological roots of our need for validation, from childhood conditioning to the masks we wear as adults. We'll uncover how this craving shapes our identity, traps us in patterns of people-pleasing, and ultimately distances us from our most authentic self. And more importantly, we'll explore how to break the cycle, how to reclaim our inner authority, and find a sense of worth that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. Because the moment you stop begging to be seen is the moment you finally see yourself. Before we knew language, we knew approval. As infants, our survival depended entirely on the emotional attunement of our caregivers. A smile meant we were safe. A scowl could trigger panic. This primal conditioning teaches the nervous system one simple equation: approval equals love, and love equals life. When love is consistent and unconditional, the child forms a solid foundation of self-worth. But when love is tied to performance, obedience, or emotional caretaking, something fractures. The child begins to associate approval with value and disapproval with danger. In this space, we first learn to split, to silence our needs, suppress our emotions, and contort ourselves to remain accepted. What begins as survival becomes a blueprint for how we relate to others and, tragically, to ourselves. This early conditioning creates what Jung would later call the false self, the version of ourselves we build to ensure connection and avoid abandonment. It starts subtly. A child may notice that their anger leads to withdrawal, but their politeness earns affection. Over time, they learn which parts of themselves to showcase and which to bury. This is not conscious manipulation. It is the birth of the persona, the social mask. And because the need for connection is so vital in early life, the child willingly trades authenticity for approval. By the time we reach adulthood, the behavior is automatic. We adapt to roles, fit into expectations, and define ourselves by how we're received. The tragedy is that we rarely stop to ask, who am I beneath all this performance? The school system reinforces this loop. From a young age, we're rewarded for compliance and punished for deviation. Grades, stars, praise, all external metrics become substitutes for internal value. The classroom is often the first place we learn to compete for approval, to suppress emotion for the sake of structure, to place authority figures on pedestals. And later, this structure extends into the workplace, relationships, even spirituality. Instead of turning inward for truth, we look to others. Do you approve of me? Am I enough in your eyes? Slowly, the compass of our identity turns outward. Our self-image becomes fragile, easily shattered by disapproval, rejection, or being overlooked. And we wonder why we feel so insecure, even when we're doing everything right. The need for validation is not weakness. It is a wound. It is the echo of a child who learned that being seen depended on performance, perfection, or silence.
Jung reminds us that what we do not make conscious will control us, and we will call it fate. Until we look at the origins of our approval-seeking patterns, we will continue to abandon ourselves for love. The real question is not, why do I want validation, but when did I first learn I wasn't enough without it? Healing begins the moment we turn toward that younger version of ourselves, not with shame, but with compassion. When we stop blaming ourselves for craving approval and start understanding where it came from, we open the door to something far more powerful than validation: self-acceptance. From the moment we enter society, school, religion, family systems, we are taught to navigate the world using a compass that does not belong to us. We are told what's right, what's normal, what's successful, and most importantly, what's acceptable. And because we are social beings wired for connection, we conform. Slowly, our intuition begins to dim. That quiet voice within, the one that once spoke so clearly in childhood, starts to feel like a liability.
We silence it in favor of applause. We abandon our instincts for inclusion. Jung spoke of the collective consciousness, a vast psychic network of shared beliefs and expectations. And when we lose our connection to our own inner voice, we become easily absorbed into this collective, mistaking external validation for personal truth. It's subtle, almost invisible. A child laughs loudly and is told to be quiet, so they shrink. A teen expresses an unpopular opinion and is mocked, so they conform. These moments become small betrayals of the self. And eventually, we don't just perform, we forget we're performing. We become so accustomed to responding to what others expect that we can no longer differentiate between our true desires and the ones we've inherited. We follow paths that are safe, familiar, approved, careers, relationships, lifestyles that look good from the outside but feel hollow within. And when the dissonance grows, we don't know why. Carl Jung believed that this disconnection from the inner self was the source of neurosis, a split between the life we live and the life that wants to live through us. In modern culture, this conditioning is supercharged by technology. Social media monetizes attention, and attention becomes a proxy for worth. We curate personas, filter our realities, and live in constant comparison. The need for validation is no longer occasional, it's addictive. Each like, comment, or view becomes a digital nod of approval. And yet, the more we receive, the emptier we feel. Why? Because it doesn't touch the parts of us that matter. It affirms the mask, not the soul. Jung would argue that when the ego is inflated by collective approval, the true self starves. The more we invest in our persona, the more estranged we become from our essence. It is a soul-level erosion, quiet, corrosive, and devastatingly common. So what happens when we lose our inner compass? We wander. We second-guess every choice. We ask others for answers we should be asking ourselves. The greatest tragedy is not that we seek approval, it's that we no longer trust our own voice without it. Jung believed that the journey back to wholeness requires a descent into the unconscious, into the shadow, into the truths we buried to be accepted. It is a return to the parts of us we exiled to fit in. The loss of our inner compass is not permanent, but reclaiming it demands honesty. It means questioning the rules we follow, the masks we wear, and the validation we chase. Because only when we stop living for others do we begin to live from within. Carl Jung introduced the concept of the persona to describe the social mask we wear, the version of ourselves we present to the world to gain acceptance, approval, and belonging. But he didn't create the idea to criticize it. In fact, the persona is necessary. Without it, we'd be raw, exposed, and unable to navigate the demands of social life. A certain degree of adaptation is healthy. We play different roles: student, friend, parent, professional, and these identities help us function in various settings. But the danger arises when we begin to believe that the mask is the self. When we identify so strongly with the persona that we forget what exists beneath it, we become strangers to our inner world. The more successful the mask is at gaining approval, the more we fear taking it off. For many people, the persona begins as a protective mechanism. A child, sensing that their authentic self is too much or not enough, creates a character more likely to win love or avoid punishment. That character becomes refined over time: charming, agreeable, high-achieving, funny, helpful.
These traits aren't false, but they're often exaggerated or used to compensate for deeper feelings of inadequacy. Over time, the child becomes the character. They lose touch with their own instincts, needs, and emotions. Jung believed that this disconnection leads to profound inner conflict. The persona may win admiration, but the self suffers in silence. It is the quiet agony of success without fulfillment, of being loved for the role we play, not for who we truly are. The problem with the persona isn't just that it hides the real self, it also demands constant maintenance. We become invested in managing how we're perceived, curating our image, and avoiding anything that could crack the mask.
Vulnerability becomes a threat. Authentic expression feels dangerous. We start to fear that if people saw who we really were, with our fears, desires, flaws, and contradictions, they would withdraw their love. So we stay in character, even when it exhausts us. The tragedy is that the more approval we get in the mask, the lonelier we feel. Because deep down, we know, they don't really see me. They see who I pretend to be. Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But that privilege comes only when we dare to remove the mask. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires us to differentiate between the persona and the true self. This doesn't mean abandoning the mask entirely, but learning to hold it loosely, to recognize it as a tool, not an identity. As we grow, we must ask, where does my persona end and my truth begin? Which parts of me are real and which are performance? These questions are not easy. They challenge the very foundation of how we've built our lives. But without them, we remain trapped in a life designed for approval, not alignment. When we begin to peel back the layers of our persona, we may discover fears, pain, and shame, but we also uncover clarity, freedom, and self-respect. And that is where real healing begins. To be accepted, many of us learn to smile when we want to scream, agree when we want to rebel, and stay silent when our soul is begging to speak. In this process of becoming likable, we bury the parts of ourselves we fear others might reject. Our anger, sadness, jealousy, lust, wildness, ambition, grief. These parts don't disappear, they go underground. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the unconscious reservoir of traits we disown in order to stay approved by family, friends, and society. The paradox? The more we suppress the shadow, the more it controls us. Repression doesn't equal resolution, it just pushes our truth into the dark, where it festers, waiting to erupt through projection, sabotage, or emotional numbness. The shadow is not inherently evil. It is simply what we are unwilling to admit exists within us. Often, it contains qualities that were once vital to our wholeness, our assertiveness, our boundaries, our creative rage. But because these traits weren't welcome in childhood or culture, we learned to associate them with shame, and so we banished them. We became the good girl, the nice guy, the peacemaker, the overachiever. But underneath that role lives an unspoken truth. We are exhausted from hiding. Every moment we suppress a real feeling to protect an image, the shadow grows stronger. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The shadow will act, whether we acknowledge it or not." When we crave validation, we often betray our authenticity in subtle ways. We laugh at jokes that hurt us. We pretend we're okay when we're crumbling. We let others cross our boundaries because it's easier. And slowly, the mask becomes our personality, but the pain doesn't disappear. It shows up in passive-aggressive behavior, chronic resentment, depression, addictions, or the strange sense that we're living someone else's life. This is the shadow screaming for air. It doesn't want to destroy us. It wants to be integrated. It wants to be seen, held, and healed. But to do that, we have to risk something terrifying, being real. Not perfect, not polished, real. And in doing so, we begin to reclaim the pieces of ourselves we lost in the pursuit of approval. Integrating the shadow doesn't mean acting out every dark impulse. It means being honest about what lives inside of us, even the parts that make us uncomfortable.
It means sitting with our jealousy without letting it poison our relationships, owning our anger without letting it explode, and acknowledging our need for control without using it to manipulate. Jung believed that the shadow holds not just darkness, but power. The more we suppress, the more disconnected we become from our true vitality. Reclaiming the shadow is not dangerous, it's liberating. Because the version of you that's always fine, always smiling, always agreeable, that's not wholeness, that's survival. And you were born for more than survival. You were born to be whole. Praise feels good, that's no secret. A compliment, a well done, an approving nod, these small gestures register as affirmations of our worth. But what we don't often realize is that praise doesn't just affirm, it conditions. Each time we receive validation, especially during our formative years, it's like a dopamine hit, a reward signal that teaches us this behavior equals love. Over time, this becomes a deeply ingrained loop. Perform, get praise, feel valuable. Jung might say we are feeding the persona, the image we've carefully constructed for others to admire. But beneath that image, the self grows anxious, because the more we rely on praise for worth, the more fragile our sense of identity becomes without it. This cycle of praise and performance becomes addictive not just emotionally, but neurologically.
Our brains begin to crave the neurochemical rush that comes with being seen, liked, and affirmed. Just as a drug addict may chase the next high, we chase approval, sometimes without even realizing it. We overachieve, we post the perfect photo, we seek applause in subtle and overt ways. The problem isn't the praise itself, it's the dependence. When our self-worth becomes hooked on other people's reactions, we lose the ability to validate ourselves. Jung warned of this when he spoke of inflation. When the ego expands based on external input, it becomes distorted, disconnected from the soul, and dangerously vulnerable to collapse when that input stops. One of the most painful realizations is that some of our greatest accomplishments were never truly ours. They were strategies for belonging. We didn't pursue excellence out of passion, we pursued it to be enough in someone else's eyes. This creates a hollow victory. We succeed, but we still feel empty. Because the praise wasn't feeding our spirit, it was feeding the persona. And like any addiction, the threshold increases. What once felt fulfilling no longer does. We need more applause, more recognition, more evidence that we matter. And yet, none of it sticks. We become trapped in an endless loop of proving, performing, and pretending, terrified of the silence that comes when the praise stops. That silence is not emptiness. It is an invitation to return to the self. Breaking this addiction requires courage. It means redefining what success means to us. It means asking, would I still choose this path if no one clapped for me? It means grieving the years we spent trying to be worthy in other people's eyes, and reclaiming the right to define our own value. Jung believed that true growth begins when we no longer chase praise, but instead listen inward. The goal is not to become immune to appreciation. We're human, and connection matters. But when we stop needing praise to feel whole, we become powerful. Because we are no longer at the mercy of applause. We are no longer performing for survival. We are living, finally, from a place of truth, not transaction. Rejection isn't just painful, it can feel soul-crushing, even life-threatening. But why does it hit so deeply? The answer lies in our evolutionary past. In early human tribes, being cast out meant one thing: death. Survival depended on belonging. If you were rejected by your group, you were vulnerable, alone, and likely not to survive. That ancient wiring hasn't disappeared. Even in modern life, where being left out doesn't lead to literal death, our nervous system reacts as if it does. The amygdala, our brain's threat detector, doesn't differentiate between emotional rejection and physical danger. So when someone disapproves, ghosts us, or walks away, it can trigger a primal terror, a body-level panic that whispers, "You're not safe anymore."
Carl Jung believed that the deepest wounds often stem from early emotional experiences, moments when we felt unseen, unloved, or unworthy. Rejection reactivates these wounds, especially if they were never fully processed. A breakup, a lost friendship, a cold silence from a parent. These moments echo louder if they reflect something unresolved within us. Rejection becomes more than a momentary loss. It becomes a symbolic reenactment of a childhood truth. I'm not lovable unless I perform, please, or disappear. And that is why rejection can feel like annihilation, because it's not just the present moment we're grieving, it's the buried past coming back to life. It's the child inside us reliving abandonment all over again. This is where the craving for validation intensifies. When we're rejected, we often don't seek healing. We seek proof that we still matter. We may chase after the person who left or throw ourselves into performance and productivity to silence the wound. We think, if I can just get someone else to choose me, this pain will go away. But this external chase never satisfies, because rejection, at its core, triggers an identity rupture. It calls into question who we are and whether we're enough. That's not something another person can fix. It's an internal fracture that demands internal repair. Jung taught that these painful encounters are not punishments, they are initiations. They awaken the unconscious, inviting us into deeper self-awareness and growth. Healing from rejection begins when we stop outsourcing our sense of worth. It begins when we stop letting someone else's inability to love us define our lovableness. The truth is, rejection is often not about us, but about the projections, fears, and limitations of the other person. Still, the pain it brings is real. Jung might say, don't run from that pain. Study it, sit with it. Let it teach you what you still believe about yourself and what you're still waiting for others to heal. Because once you face the wound rejection touches, you reclaim your power. You begin to understand that no one, not even the person who hurt you, holds the keys to your wholeness, and that is the first step toward emotional freedom. On the surface, people-pleasing looks like kindness. It wears the mask of compassion, generosity, and agreeability. But underneath that smile is often something much more complex: fear. Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of not being enough unless we're useful. Carl Jung would say that people-pleasing is a survival strategy built around the persona, the social mask we construct to gain approval and avoid rejection. We become masters at sensing others' expectations, anticipating their needs before our own, and shrinking ourselves to fit inside their comfort. We do this not because we are weak, but because at some point we learned that love was conditional, and now we work tirelessly to earn what should have always been given freely. Over time, the cost of this strategy is immense. We lose touch with our own desires. Our yes becomes automatic, even when our soul screams no. We bend, twist, and overextend until we're no longer sure where other people end and we begin. People pleasers often become emotionally exhausted, not because they're giving too much, but because they're never receiving what they truly need: space to be real, space to be seen. Jung might say that the people pleaser lives in exile from their authentic self. They become prisoners of performance, emotionally overdrawn but spiritually underfed. Eventually, resentment sets in, not just toward others, but toward the self for abandoning its own truth in the name of keeping the peace. The irony of people-pleasing is that it rarely produces genuine connection. When we hide our needs to avoid conflict, when we suppress our truth to keep others comfortable, the relationships we build are based on illusion. People love the mask, not the person behind it. This creates a painful paradox. The more we please others, the more invisible we feel. The very thing we hoped would bring love ends up reinforcing our loneliness. And still, we keep performing, hoping that one day someone will notice the effort and finally give us permission to stop. But that permission has to come from within. No amount of applause can silence the ache of self-abandonment. Jung would say that the soul cannot breathe in a life built on false peace. Breaking the people-pleasing pattern begins with reclaiming the radical idea that your worth is not dependent on how useful, agreeable, or impressive you are. It means setting boundaries that may disappoint others but honor yourself. It means risking disapproval to speak your truth. Jung believed individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires tension. And part of that tension is learning to sit with discomfort. The discomfort of not being liked, of being misunderstood, of letting others feel their own disappointment without trying to fix it. Because only when we stop trying to be everything for everyone can we start being something true for ourselves. The cost of people-pleasing is your soul. The reward of authenticity is your life. Behind every adult who craves validation is a child who once felt invisible. A child who may have excelled in school not out of joy, but because achievement meant acknowledgement. A child who became funny, helpful, quiet, or easy not because it came naturally, but because those roles were safe. Carl Jung taught that the psyche retains every experience, even the ones we consciously forget. So when that child wasn't emotionally seen or accepted, it left an imprint. I must earn love. I must be impressive to be safe. That wound doesn't vanish with age. It travels with us, into our friendships, our romantic relationships, even our careers, echoing through every moment where we feel unnoticed or underappreciated. This is the wounded inner child, not a metaphor, but a real psychological presence within the psyche. Jung saw these internal figures as living aspects of the unconscious, carrying unresolved emotional truths. When this inner child is unseen, it acts out. It demands attention, approval, and reassurance, not in childish ways, but in adult disguises. We chase promotions, obsess over social media likes, overcommit to people-pleasing. We tell ourselves it's ambition or kindness, but often it's just the child saying, "Do you see me now? Am I enough yet?" And tragically, no amount of praise or external love will soothe that child if we ourselves keep ignoring them.
To heal this part of us, we must do what no one else did. See them, not as weak, broken, or embarrassing, but as someone who adapted brilliantly to survive a world that couldn't always meet their needs. This requires immense compassion. You don't scold a child for being scared. You don't shame them for needing love. You hold them. You listen. You tell them you never had to earn love. You were already worthy. Jung believed that true healing begins with integration, pulling these lost or suppressed parts of the self back into consciousness, where they can finally be understood, honored, and made whole. When we reconnect with the inner child, we begin to understand the real reason validation meant so much. It wasn't about ego, it was about being witnessed, truly, deeply, without condition. And now, as adults, that responsibility falls to us. We must become the parent we never had, the protector we always longed for. That doesn't mean blaming our upbringing forever. It means becoming conscious of what shaped us and choosing to reshape it. Because when we stop abandoning the child inside us, we stop chasing love outside of us. We stop bleeding for applause, and we start building a life rooted not in performance, but in presence, peace, and radical self-recognition. Reclaiming your inner authority means learning to trust yourself, your instincts, your feelings, your voice, above all external voices clamoring for approval. Carl Jung emphasized the process of individuation, becoming your whole, authentic self by integrating all parts of your psyche, especially the shadow and the persona. When we base our worth on others' validation, we give away our power. Instead of being the captain of our own soul, we become passengers on a ship steered by public opinion and fleeting praise. Inner authority is the reclaiming of sovereignty, where your value is not negotiable because it is rooted in a deep, unshakable relationship with yourself. This journey isn't easy. For many, the need for validation feels like a lifeline, a way to survive emotionally in a world that often feels cold or rejecting. Letting go of that crutch can feel like walking a tightrope over an abyss of loneliness and uncertainty. But Jung teaches that true freedom comes when we walk that abyss with courage. To reclaim inner authority, we must first confront our fears of being alone, unliked, or misunderstood. We must learn to say no without guilt, to set boundaries without apology, and to embrace our imperfections without shame. This is the hard work of becoming, painful, humbling, but ultimately liberating. With practice, trusting yourself becomes a muscle you build. It starts with small acts, choosing your truth over convenience, honoring your emotions even when others dismiss them, and listening deeply to your inner voice despite external noise. Jung believed that the self is not static. It is a living, evolving center of consciousness that requires constant tending. When we cultivate our inner authority, we build resilience to rejection and indifference. External validation shifts from being a necessity to a welcome gift, a bonus, not a requirement. This shift creates space for authentic relationships, where connection arises from mutual respect, not dependency. Ultimately, reclaiming inner authority is an act of self-love and rebellion. It's a refusal to live according to others' scripts and a commitment to author your own story. It means recognizing that the power to define your worth has always been inside you, not in likes, compliments, or approval. Jung's wisdom reminds us that the journey inward, while challenging, is the most profound revolution we can undertake. When you reclaim your inner authority, you stop bleeding for others and start thriving for yourself. This is the essence of true freedom and the beginning of a life lived fully and fearlessly. True confidence isn't about collecting compliments or winning approval. It's a quiet, steady knowing, a sense of self that isn't shaken by praise or criticism. Carl Jung taught that individuation is a process of becoming whole, of integrating our shadow and persona to reveal the true self beneath the masks. When we build confidence on external validation, it's like constructing a house on sand, unstable, vulnerable to every gust of opinion. Real confidence emerges when we root ourselves in authenticity, embracing both light and shadow. This inner alignment creates a deep reservoir of strength that no external force can drain. For many, the quest for approval is exhausting because it demands constant performance. The ego strives to be liked, admired, and accepted, but this pursuit is a double-edged sword. It can drive achievement but also fuel anxiety and self-doubt. Jung would argue that the ego's need for validation is a defense against feeling fragmented or lost. Yet, paradoxically, the more we depend on external approval, the more fragmented we become. True confidence comes when the ego loosens its grip and allows the deeper self, the authentic, imperfect, and vulnerable self, to lead. Only then do we stand firm, no matter the audience. This shift is a profound transformation. When approval becomes a byproduct rather than the goal, we step into a new way of being.
Our actions flow from values, not validation. Our voices rise from truth, not fear. We connect with others from genuine presence, not from trying to impress or manipulate. Jung's archetype of the self represents this integrated wholeness, a harmony of opposites, light and dark, strength and fragility. Living from this place is not about perfection, but about courage. The courage to be seen as we truly are, to own our story, and to accept ourselves unconditionally. The freedom found in true confidence radiates outward. It frees us from the exhausting chase and the fragile highs and lows of praise and rejection. It opens space for deeper relationships and richer experiences, and most importantly, it reconnects us to the core truth Jung emphasized: you are enough. Not because others say so, but because you have embraced your whole self with all its complexities and contradictions. When you embody this truth, you no longer bleed for validation. Instead, you thrive in your own sovereign light. And that is the ultimate liberation. We spend so much of our lives reaching outward, searching for approval, acceptance, and validation, believing that these external affirmations will fill the emptiness inside. Carl Jung's profound insight reminds us that this longing is a reflection of something deeper, a call to come home to ourselves. True healing and confidence do not come from applause or permission granted by others.
They arise from the courageous journey inward, where we confront our shadows, shed our masks, and reclaim the voice that has been waiting patiently beneath layers of conditioning and fear. The path to freedom begins with radical self-acceptance. It means embracing every part of ourselves, the light and the dark, the beautiful and the broken. It means becoming our own witness, our own parent, our own champion. Only then can we release the bleeding caused by unmet needs and live from a place of sovereignty, peace, and authentic power. You don't need anyone else to tell you you're enough.
That truth has always been within you. It's time to stop seeking validation outside and start living fully from the unshakable confidence that springs from knowing and loving who you truly are. This is not just the end of a video. It's the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where your worth is self-defined, your voice is heard, and your soul is free.